Hello and welcome to the final basketball webcast of the season. No applause from the peanut gallery. We are here to talk about Missouri's efforts in the NCAA tournament, look back on the season, and a brief look ahead maybe to next year. I am Tribune sports editor Joe Walljasper. This is beat writer Steve Walentik. Steve, we're back from Buffalo. Let's go through those games quickly. First round, Missouri plays Clemson, a team that wanted to run with Missouri, which I think proved to be not that great of an idea.
Poor decision. Really bad decision.
And Missouri looked really good. It was kind of like maybe the quintessential Missouri game in that they created all kind of havoc with forcing turnovers, steals, got a lot of easy baskets out of it.
I think they had 22 points in transition and a ton of turnovers, 20 turnovers they created, 15 steals. JT Tiller had 5 in the first half. It was really the perfect remedy for this team. Had been struggling offensively, and Clemson basically played right into their hands, giving them a chance to get some easy offense. Obviously, the half-court offense has been tough to come by for this team for the last few weeks, but they really looked good offensively, getting up and down, and it ends up being, I guess, an 8-point game. But I felt like they were in control most of the way, and they fell behind in the first half, but came back and really played. Showed that. There are teams that play up-tempo, there are teams that press, but nobody quite presses or plays up-tempo like Missouri does.
The first half, I felt like they got behind. Basically, Clemson just got hot from behind the three-point arc. They're not a good three-point shooting team. They did, so they built a 9-point lead, I think it was, but then Missouri basically, I think, controlled the game throughout. Keith Ramsey, probably his best game, maybe of his career, and Kim English kind of broke out of his shooting slump, had a nice game, scored 20 points. Just a good all-around effort, I thought. And I think basically that game, to me, the season became an unqualified success. I mean, it probably was anyway, but I thought, you get to the second round, at this point it's kind of all gravy. So you get to the second round, they face West Virginia, a number 2 seed, and kind of as good a matchup as Clemson was for Missouri, I thought West Virginia was that tough a matchup just based on, A, Bob Huggins, their coach, has played against Anderson and kind of knows what to expect. B, they're big, they're huge. 3, they don't turn it over. And they play a slow, kind of grinding pace, which Missouri has trouble, changing that when they don't turn it over. So all those things kind of played out, but Missouri did hang around, I thought, fairly impressively. It was still a game in the last few minutes.
I think it was 5 points going into the last 3 or 4 minutes, 2 or 3 minutes maybe. And, I think what we saw is that West Virginia is right now just better than Missouri is. And, Missouri played pretty well and to hang around and made them earn it, but Missouri doesn't have a guy like Deshaun Butler who can take over a game, which he certainly did in the first half with 19 points and a couple of big threes. It seemed like any time Missouri left him open, he was knocking one down. Missouri fans will look back at, and the players too, will look back at a bunch of missed free throws and some layups that didn't go. But, some of those layups didn't go because of the size that West Virginia has all across the roster. I mean, Butler's their second shortest starter, and he's 6'7". So it was a tough matchup, and Missouri didn't make enough shots. West Virginia, I think, does a good job in half-court defense, and Missouri kind of went back to the team that we'd seen the last few weeks where they couldn't really generate enough offense to get over the hump.
I think maybe that's one of the differences between this year and last year is they really didn't have a guy they could go to when they did get stuck in a half-court game and you really needed some offense. They didn't really have that guy that could just go get you a basket. Last year they kind of had Leo Lyons who could play with his back to the basket and probably draw a foul, or Damari Carroll. This year they really didn't. They had guys who tried, but I didn't feel like they really had a guy that you could lean on because there's, I think, about a 10-minute stretch there of game time where West Virginia didn't even score.
It's longer than that. It was like about 12 minutes
yeah,
where they didn't have a field goal.
Yeah.
And they made a living at the free throw line because, they're big and athletic and they attack the basket, and Missouri had to foul them a lot. And they made their free throws, Missouri didn't, so that was certainly a difference in the outcome. But, yeah, Missouri doesn't have, and it hasn't all year, had that one guy that you could just know what you were going to get at the offensive end, or you could go to him. And certainly Lyons was that guy where even if he wasn't going to make a basket, he was going to get a foul late in games last year, and he was very effective at that. And they really had two guys because Carroll could do the same thing, maybe not as proficiently as Lyons, but certainly was a threat.
Look back on this season. for you, I mean, how would you judge it?
I mean, I think it's definitely, you have to consider it a pretty good success. They were picked 7th for a reason in the Big 12, and they obviously finished 5th. I thought they were probably better, back in October than the 7th place projections, but certainly losing 3,000-point scorers, not having a quote-unquote go-to guy. I think Mike Anderson got a lot out of the guys that he did have. A lot of the sophomores that you just weren't sure about going into the season made the jump that you kind of wanted them to make. They weren't always consistent. Really, none of them were consistent, but they gave you enough between them that this team was competitive in just about every game it played. The only losses that you really look back on and say what happened were certainly in the Nebraska game, in the Big 12 tournament, and the Oral Roberts game. I think people are going to wonder about that. But otherwise, they did basically what they were supposed to do, and they got some good wins, got to be one of the last 32 teams standing, and I think that's a pretty good success for what certainly has to be considered a rebuilding year.
Yeah, for me, I think, a lot of teams can kind of catch lightning in a bottle one year and, have your nephew be an all Big 12 player, but after he's gone, then what happens? And I think when you take a team that's, this probably should have been a quote-unquote rebuilding year, but you can get them back to the tournament, get them a game deep in the tournament. That, to me, lets me think that this is probably going to be a pretty natural thing for them to keep going back. Now, that may be cheapened somewhat if they expand the tournament and everybody gets in, but I think they're going to be of a quality of a team that is, the top, maybe a top 20 to 30 in the near future, that kind of team.
Yeah, and with the recruits that they have coming in, you don't know how good they're going to be and how quickly, but certainly they've got a couple of elite prospects coming in that maybe you could even push that higher. I mean, certainly I think they were a top 10 team last year. To be top 32 this year, I think is a pretty good step, and if they can fall somewhere in between next season, I think fans should certainly be pleased with where this program is going.
With the sophomore class they got now, too, I think not only next year, but then the next year, I think that may be when they're at their peak. So that'll be interesting to see. As you look back on this year, who in your mind would be the team MVP?
It's tough because they don't really have a traditional MVP. Usually you look at the leading scorer, and I think Kim English was the leading scorer, but he was not very efficient and not very consistent and really struggled more so in the Big 12 season than earlier. So I would lean against him. I think, Marcus Denman, some nights I thought he might be, but he certainly didn't finish the season strong. So I'd probably look at one of two seniors, Zaire Taylor and Keith Ramsey, who not coincidentally played more minutes than anybody else. And I think that's because Mike Anderson saw their value. They aren't the guys that, are big scorers, although Zaire did that some. But they just sort of held everything together. I think, if you look at Ramsey, especially after Justin Safford goes down and they get even that more thin up front, he really gave them some consistent production up there, and wasn't much of an offensive threat, but was a solid rebounder, best rebounder this team had, a real defensive presence, blocking shots and getting steals. He was second on the team in both categories. I would lean towards him probably, but I could make a case for Zaire Taylor as well, hitting the biggest shots of the season maybe against Iowa State.
Yeah, I would go with Taylor probably just because good defensively, didn't turn the ball over, and without you can make a case that if he doesn't make those shots against Iowa State, and it wasn't just one big shot, it was three, that they don't make the tournament at all. Maybe if he doesn't make it and they're 9-7 in Big 12 play, they take Nebraska more seriously, beat them, and it's a moot point. But they would have been nervous on Selection Sunday. Maybe they were anyway, but they would have been really nervous, and for good reason, if he hadn't done that. I think all year he was pretty consistent. He wasn't a consistent scorer, but he's a pretty consistent player.
Yeah, he had a stretch there where he was battling an illness that he wasn't as much, but certainly if you look at a whole, I think he and Ramsey were definitely their two most consistent players. You knew what you were going to get out of them pretty much every game.
Now, after a season ends, when you got a coach that's kind of hot like Mike Anderson, there will be talk of him leaving. What do you think about? Do you think he's maybe a Missouri lifer, or do you think he's a guy that could be tempted to go? I mean, at this point now, the only real job that where there's an opening that he would be linked to was Auburn, which was filled. There's kind of persistent talk that Arkansas might be a possibility, although they're keeping their coach. I mean, what are your thoughts on his longevity here?
Well, I mean, I certainly think in this day and age you could always see somebody going somewhere. That said, he made a pretty good statement last year by turning down a really nice offer from Georgia to stick around. That he's not, it's not just about making more money with him. It's got to be the right situation. A lot of these jobs that Auburn that came up aren't really the right situation. I think for him to take another job, I would really believe it'd have to be an obvious step up, and I'm not sure, there aren't that many jobs that are obvious steps up. Maybe there's something with Arkansas. He spent a lot of time in Fayetteville. If that job ever comes open, it's not going to this year, from what we know. If you go, down the future, that could still be something to watch. But I think he likes where this program's at. I think he likes the direction it's headed. Certainly, he's about to add a kid in Phil Pressey that he's known all of Phil's life, and I think he would like to coach him. Certainly, he's close with his father, and I think those are all signs that would lead me to believe he's going to be here for a while anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that he's going to be a guy that for a program to be a definite step up from Missouri, you almost would have to be one of those blue blood programs like a North Carolina, Kentucky, Kansas. I don't think those jobs are coming open. These other ones, at best, would be lateral moves to me. And plus, if they're coming open, they probably have struggled, and so you're talking about a couple of years to get it back to where Missouri is now. I don't know. It doesn't make a ton of sense to me. I think maybe the one fear that maybe Mike Alden would have is that as he likes to point out about all the extra revenue that schools in SEC and Big Ten country have, or if a school like that opens up and can just throw a pile of money at him, an offer he can't refuse, basically.
But you would think that $2 million from plus a year from Georgia could have been an offer he couldn't refuse, and he did refuse it. So, I don't know that anybody. I'll say this: I don't know that anybody really knows what Mike Anderson wants to do, other than Mike Anderson and his inner circle. He's not a guy that's
doesn't bear his soul too much.
He definitely doesn't. And I mean, I feel like I know him about as well as most people in the media would, but I don't know what he's thinking when it comes to these things. But he hasn't done anything that leads you to believe that he's looking to get out.
Mm-hmm. Now, as you look at it, Missouri has 4 recruits that have already signed for next year, which would fill the roster up, although it would appear they're still recruiting people, which would lead me to believe someone is on the way out. Do you think they have serious plans to add another player before next year? And if so, what does that mean for the people currently at the end of the bench?
I think, first of all, they would definitely like to add somebody. I think, they look at what everybody else looks at and sees their front court and sees that could be a weakness that needs to be addressed before next season. So I think certainly they're looking at adding another another forward to the mix up there. And Ricardo Ratliff is a junior college player from Florida whose name has been mentioned and Missouri is looking hard at and has been since at least the fall, maybe before. He's scheduled to come here for a visit, I believe the second weekend in April. Would fit a need for sure, 6'9", and a really big-time scorer, pretty good rebounder. Not necessarily the defensive-minded guy that we usually think of with Mike Anderson, but I think if they can get him or even somebody else who's on their radar, I wouldn't be surprised if they pull the trigger and bring him in. What does that mean for guys on the roster? I certainly think there's a possibility that there's going to be some guys leaving other than the 3 seniors. I think
not of their own volition. I mean, do you think they're going to get pushed out the door?
I don't know. I don't know if you would say they're going to be pushed out the door. I think it's a situation where guys could see the writing on the wall that there's just not going to be a lot of playing time available and nudged in that direction maybe, but I don't think they,
Well, if they don't get nudged and they don't get the message, they're going to have to be pushed out the door because you can't have.
I think that's true. Certainly you look though. I mean, Missouri had 2 freshmen this year that barely played, and they were playing a position that seemed to be in need. And
Tyler Stone and John Underwood.
And I think one of them could decide that they'd rather look at a different situation. I think a lot of people, I get a lot of emails, people wondering if Miguel Paul is going to decide that he wants to leave. I've been told that the coaching staff is hoping that doesn't happen. They like they like what kind of player he could still project to be. And Missouri is losing 2 ball handlers from this year's team and is only bringing in 1 in Pressey. So I think he could be a guy that actually would play more next year if he is still around. But that'll be something to follow during this offseason.
And lastly, maybe just look ahead to next season. Maybe what sort of year do you expect?
I think this team has a chance next year to be as good as it was this year, maybe even a little bit better. I think the Big 12 won't be as strong at the top. I think that said, they are losing 3 seniors that I think were probably more important to this year's success than you would figure based on their scoring production. I think JT Tiller and Keith Ramsey are really pretty rare defensive players, and I think Zaire Taylor was just the perfect thing for this team in terms of being a steady point guard who could kind of do a lot of different things the last 2 years. So I think those guys are going to be hard to replace, particularly from a toughness standpoint. But they should be more offensively skilled next season, assuming Tony Mitchell and Pressey come in and are ready to make an impact. So I think definitely we could see this team being back at least in the second round of the NCAA tournament again.
Do you think they're a team that maybe somewhere between 3rd, 5th, 6th in the Big 12? Where do you see them falling there?
I think you definitely could see them climbing up to, I think, possibly 3rd. I think if you look at the Big 12, the top teams in the league are all losing significant pieces, including Kansas State, who I would probably look at as maybe the favorite going into next year. They're losing their point guard in Denny Clemente. I think Kansas is going to lose a lot.
I'm not sure quite how much yet, but
Sharon Collins is going to leave, and I think there's a good chance that Cole Aldrich and Xavier Henry could join him. Now, they're going to reload. They always do. James Anderson's gone from Oklahoma State. He's tough to replace, obviously, Big 12 Player of the Year. Donald Sloan and Brian Davis are leaving Texas A&M. Damian James is gone from Texas. So
maybe Udo at Baylor, depending where he goes.
Udo is projected as a possible lottery pick, could leave early, and Tweety Carter is a senior, so Baylor's going to take a hit for sure. Some of these programs are going to be able to, fill in nicely and still contend, but I think Missouri has a real good chance to be in that mix.
All right. Well, thanks for joining us on all these basketball webcasts, and we will be back, I guess, in November.